Christine, this episode is not about Charlie Kirk. I just want to make that clear. We have opinions about how he lived his life, and this episode is not meant to convey those opinions, although they can certainly show through. But what we really wanted to tackle with this episode was the aftermath of the killing of Charlie Kirk, the way that free speech has very swiftly been removed as a right in the US. So this week we have the amazing independent journalist Tenbarge on, who has been a longtime internet and culture reporter. And she wrote a really great piece on her newsletter, Spitfire News, about just some of the people who have been fired from their jobs or from employment opportunities because they managed to fall on the wrong side of an internet mob who were looking for comments about Charlie Kirk to target people. And I also wanted to note that this interview that we did was recorded before the Jimmy Kimmel stuff that has happened this week, where his show has been temporarily taken off the air by ABC and Disney. So, Christine, having said all that,
there will probably be more stuff that happens before this episode airs.
Yes. Yeah. And I will say we're recording this intro on Friday, September 19th. So anything that happens after this obviously won't be part of the episode.
It's a really good examination of language and, what we feel comfortable saying and not saying anymore.
Having said that, you're listening to Cancel Me Daddy, and let's get into the interview.
Joining us on the show today is Tenbarge. She's the award-winning independent journalist behind Spitfire News. You probably know her as the former tech and culture reporter for NBC News. Welcome to the show, Kat.
Thanks so much for having me.
Kat, it's such an honor to have you on the show. Like, we've been mutuals online forever, and I feel like your beat and this show intersect so often. And you know what ends up happening, right? And I know we're here to talk about something very serious, but what ends up happening is I am like, oh, I should get Kat on the show. And I'd be like, oh, this would be a great topic to have Kat on the show about. And then I look and one of our close competitor podcasts is already having you on to talk about this. And I'm like, God damn it, I missed out again.
That's so funny. I feel like post working in mainstream media, it's like podcast circuit all the time, which is amazing. I love doing podcasts. And I feel like this right now, it seems like most people literally get their news and information through the podcast ecosystem.
It seems that way. Yeah. Our podcast listenership has picked up quite a bit as well. Obviously, putting episodes out on YouTube has helped that quite a bit, but I think you're right. I think we're in a shifting landscape.
Yeah. We're in the everyone is a podcast era, which connects with what we're going to be talking about today too.
Yeah.
Wow.
So we wanted to have you on because you wrote a fantastic article about the sort of impromptu cancel culture that has popped up around the assassination of Charlie Kirk, right? Where you have all of these people who run the gamut of career-wise, from professor to students are getting arrested. You have Karen Ataya at the Washington Post who got let go in the aftermath. She was the last remaining Black columnist at the Washington Post, and they're like, you're gone. So you have all these people who are getting fired for quote unquote saying the wrong thing or saying something in the wrong way, or in some cases accurately quoting things that Charlie Kirk said when he was alive. So we wanted to have you on to talk about that. Can you give us, this has been the dominant political story, but in case somebody is listening who has been living under the rock, can you give us a TLDR of what's been going on?
Yes. So for the past almost week now, every day, just the days have blended together because it's been a while since we've had a news event that has this kind of prominence over every aspect of mainstream culture. And so, last week, this conservative political activist, Charlie Kirk, who had a massive podcast following, huge YouTube following, frequently appeared in viral clips on social media, and had a very close influential role alongside the Trump administration in sort of promoting Trump and MAGA ideology to young people. He was fatally shot on a college campus during a tour stop for this sort of like political activism. And immediately, you saw this crackdown on free speech in the wake of the shooting. As it came in, like news came in hours later that he had died essentially on impact during this shooting. But right away, within hours, MSNBC had fired Matthew Dowd, who was a senior political analyst. And actually, if I am remembering correctly, was involved with George W. Bush's administration, or like he was actually like a traditional Republican leaning political analyst. And he was fired for simply going on TV and saying that the rhetorical environment that Charlie Kirk contributed to before his death was so hateful and incited violence. And that violence came around and ultimately claimed Kirk's life as well. I mean, literally, before that, the last thing he said before he was shot was he was talking about gun violence, and he tried to blame gun violence on trans people. And then the last words out of his mouth were like, well, are we counting gang violence when we talk about mass shootings? Like implying that it also doesn't count if people of color, Black people, commit gun violence against other Black people. So his final sort of words were encouraging this rhetoric that devalues trans lives, devalues Black lives, also paints these marginalized groups as the sources of violence, even though that's not true. And marginalized groups are more likely to be targeted by violence. But that was who Charlie Kirk was. And so you saw this immediate pushback and blowback and like forceful censorship of journalists and academics in particular, I would say, who were accurately characterizing Charlie Kirk's life and accurately reporting on and sort of creating this living history of an obituary of who Charlie Kirk was. You see that crackdown on speech. And then you also see all of this conservative momentum to sort of carry on, again, Kirk's own legacy. When he was at the head of Turning Point USA, they compiled professor watch lists where they listed academics, especially Black women, especially Black professors in general, trans and queer professors, women professors. They created these lists of people who were then harassed and targeted simply for covering topics that fit into a quote unquote left-wing ideology. So for covering women's and gender studies, for teaching these things, they were targeted with violence. And so also in the wake of Kirk's death, you've seen websites devoted to doxing people, to listing their places of employment for, again, doing something as simple as just saying this was a quote Charlie Kirk said. Some people have been doxed accidentally or mistakenly because they never even said anything about Charlie Kirk, but just the momentum around this is so strong. It's they're targeting and hurting people who weren't even involved because it's just like so careless and egregious in like the scope of who they're trying to punish and target.
I think what really scares me about this moment too is everything has always been so online, and that doesn't mitigate the harm at all, because we all know that the harm online gets people doxxed or threatened in real life or harmed or killed even. But I was talking to someone the other day. The topic came up of the assassination, and I tried to give context. This person is not online, and the immediate words out of their mouth were, "Don't say that. He had children." And like, I don't mean that in a mocking way at all. Like, it was just this horror almost that I was saying anything about someone who had died and saying accurate things to try to say, well, yes, this was a tragedy and he contributed to this culture of violence that we're seeing. Do you see this kind of move from the online to the offline happening here? Is this like a real kind of moment of inflection that we haven't seen before? Or is this, have we been kind of leading up to this point the whole time?
I think a bit of both, because from basically the second that I heard the news, I did envision this becoming an inflection point, because I think that the fact that Charlie Kirk was an influencer just sets this apart in a way where it reaches the normal mainstream mass audience in a way that actual political assassinations like Melissa Hortman, the Minnesota state legislator, that actual political assassination of a elected sitting politician, that did not resonate with people in the way that the shooting of Charlie Kirk resonated with people. And I thought that would be the case, because I've covered influencers and influencer culture for a long time. And one of the things that's most misunderstood about it is just like, we've seen this huge gap that has only grown and grown between institutions and sort of traditional legacy power and new media and sort of new power, which is centered around influencers and people who have online influence and large online platforms. And so I knew that Charlie Kirk was going to break through in a way that other violence has not. But I think within that, you see this double standard that is so frustrating and hard to wrap your head around, which is you have a lot of people who are not journalists, people who are not super tapped into what's going on in the news. You have these people reacting to this violence in this way, where it's like, we can't say anything bad about him. We need to immediately sort of not just condemn this, but treat him like we would treat our own family member, in that, like, you don't want to say anything bad about your cousin. You don't want to bring up like old things about like a family member or someone in your community who you respect, because you're viewing that on a more personal level, versus with Charlie Kirk, he's a person who had this enormous power and influence. Therefore, his obituary, as told through the lens of journalism, as told through the lens of public perception, is like, we actually have to do a thorough accounting of who this man really was and the consequences of his actions when he was alive. And I just think that like the double standard we're seeing here, where people are like, oh, he was a father, he had children. It's like, everyone targeted with violence has a family. Everyone targeted with violence comes from somewhere. And yet you don't see this response. You didn't see this response to, again, like political assassinations and political violence against sitting politicians in recent years, with the exception of Trump. You also don't see this reaction to other victims of what we could call political violence, like victims of war. You don't see this response to Palestinian journalists who have been killed, who had children. And so I think it's very interesting. I was looking at YouTube comments yesterday on a beauty influencer's video about Charlie Kirk. And this is not a political content creator. This is just a beauty lifestyle content creator who felt compelled to speak out on Charlie Kirk and say, this is wrong. We need to condemn this glorification of violence, basically everything we're talking about right now. And I was reading her comment section, and there was a comment from someone who said, like, this is my line in the sand. I will lose friends over this. I will not allow this kind of darkness into my life, which assumedly refers to people criticizing Charlie Kirk. And I found that very interesting, because the phrasing "my line in the sand" implies that like this is the time that I am going to create a strict boundary between those who I agree with and those who I don't. And why is this that time? I think that to me shows that this has broken through. And I think a lot of that comes down to the fact that Charlie Kirk was an influencer. People relate to influencers. They see themselves through the lens of influencer culture. And so that makes Charlie Kirk, to a lot of people, a more relatable figure, that this will be more impactful on sort of their worldview.
Mm-hmm. And you use the term shooting for Charlie Kirk. And, you know, it's funny because when I asked you the question, I said assassination. So I'm wondering if some of this kind of whitewashing of language is even leaching into my own brain. Can you talk about that?
Absolutely. And I almost said it too and had to catch myself because I am making sort of a conscious choice to not refer to it as an assassination, because I do think that conveys a narrative that we've seen that's been very palpable and very pushed by the Trump administration, which is to sort of convey the authority and legitimacy of an elected politician when we're talking about Charlie Kirk. And I think that rhetorical sort of device of referring to it as an assassination, and then also the symbolism we've seen conveyed by the Trump administration, demanding that flags be lowered to half-mast to honor his death, attempts to put him in the rotunda where typically elected officials are displayed in death, awarding him posthumously a Medal of Freedom. These are very intentional actions that are designed to convey, again, this legitimacy and this authority around Charlie Kirk and his ideas, even though Charlie Kirk never ran for office. He was never elected to office. He was not a politician. There was no sort of vote conveying any of that legitimacy or authority. And in fact, he was a podcaster. He was an influencer. And I think that the mainstream media, which is supposed to be unbiased, which is supposed to be objective, insists that that is the case when it comes to we're not going to speak negatively about Trump because we're so unbiased. Yet, is contributing, is assisting in this project to legitimize Kirk in this way in death that I think is really anti-journalistic, because it's just, it's the same thing that you see when mainstream media just takes the police at its word or takes the courts at their word, like this conveying of legitimacy around institutional decisions, even when they're wrong, even when they are propaganda, and even when journalism should be speaking truth to power and not just going along with whatever power says.
Yeah, I think this has been a very scary week for me, actually, I like to joke that I'm a D-list Twitter celebrity, although I'm not on Twitter anymore. But people understand me when I say that. But also, I am the only mainstream trans columnist. And just immediately, you had people trying to jump to blaming trans people for this. You had people on the right saying, the last thing he talked about was trans people related to shootings. So it must have been somebody, I think there's this perception that it was somebody in the crowd who just got upset and, forgive the wording, but triggered and did something violent. And through every step of the public investigation that we've had, you had government officials and right-wing influencers working together to try to establish this narrative that it was trans people who got them killed. And you see that again with this roommate who has been reported as trans, although we haven't heard from this individual ourselves. And neighbors said, I don't think this person is trans. So I've been very careful to not ascribe transness unless I have verified it, and I haven't verified it. Although, admittedly, haven't looked into it closely, don't know the person, haven't tried to track them down. I've done zero reporting. But this is just how I try to interpret these news stories. But this person reportedly, even if they are trans or not, has been cooperative with the police, sent the text messages from the shooter to the police. And it's my perception that helped them recover the gun, although I could be mistaken on that. But in the meantime, you have the entire right-wing apparatus saying it was this trans person who manipulated this nice young Mormon man from a Republican family into taking this life, where it sounds like this person just didn't like Charlie Kirk. And I don't want to talk about the shooter's motivations to that degree, but my experience of this last week has been, how do I, as a trans person, as a journalist, as a columnist, dare I say influencer, although I hate using that word for myself, how do I navigate this? And I've had 5 to 10 different story ideas, and all of them I've just ended up scrubbing to the point where I think this podcast episode might be the only time that I comment on this. But why is it that part of the story, the trans people did this to us? Why is that dynamic so pervasive in this particular case, despite the fact that there's really not a lot of evidence for this?
Right. I think that when you look at the journalistic sort of malpractice over the past many years, a huge theme here and a huge repeated example of some of the biggest mainstream journalistic institutions just failing with no accountability, no ever apologizing, no walking back, no learning from mistakes. It's around trans coverage. And so, like, going into the reporting and the coverage of Charlie Kirk's death, I know for me, having watched this history unfold, this like recent and contemporaneous history unfold of journalistic failing, I was expecting the coverage to be bad. And I was not necessarily expecting there to be, it wasn't, it as it unfolded and as the right-wing media apparatus immediately tried to blame the shooting on trans people as well as leftists, college professors, academia, the usual list of targets, none of that was surprising, and sort of the mainstream media embrace of this and pushing of this was not surprising. But I just think it is a really disturbing sign that no matter how bleak the violence gets, I think like the mainstream media at this point is just going to continue doing the same thing over and over again. Find the most marginalized groups that there's this bipartisan consensus around in terms of not protecting. I mean, you see the same thing with the treatment of Palestinian people and pro-Palestinian people. And it also reminds me of how when we look at post-political violence in America, throughout, the past several decades, there's been this repeated instinct to target and blame a marginalized group. I think about how after 9/11, there was so much anti-Muslim sentiment that obviously continues to this day. And now you have trans people as a population being treated in a similar way. And it really does make me question, like, when is... Obviously, the New York Times got rid of its public editor. Obviously, the Wall Street Journal has a conservative bias. These are like known things, but it does make you want to demand other people in the media apparatus to speak out and say, like, this type of reporting is wrong. And this, again, legitimizing of these unfounded right-wing narratives that just spread bigotry, that just spread hate, that just incite violence. Like, the fact that you see some of the biggest liberal institutions co-signing it and perpetuating it, it needs to be pushed back against. And I feel like that's kind of one of my takeaways from not just Charlie Kirk, but also every major news event during Trump 2.0 and even before Trump 2.0.
Yeah, I mean, I see like Ezra Klein in the New York Times, and I'm going to call him out by name. We used to work together at Vox, so I'm allowed to do that. He's out here writing, Charlie Kirk did politics the right way, and he was just trying to have conversations with the other side, which I don't really agree with. Like, Charlie Kirk, they're portraying him as trying to, spending his life trying to find common ground with people, but he never once changed his mind on any issue because of anybody that he ever talked about. And he was always pointing a camera at his face. To me, he was just a content creator. He's a debate bro, content creator. He kind of launched that whole genre of like, come at me, bro, debates. Like, God, like Jubilee is his legacy.
Yep.
What was his legacy?
Jubilee.
Yes. This is one of the things that has made me the most frustrated about the coverage of Charlie Kirk and the discourse around Charlie Kirk. And having covered influencers for years, this is a very familiar thing to me that I have come to understand and expect from legacy media, which is like, there are people within these newsrooms who understand all of this perfectly. Those people do not get to be the ones making editorial decisions. They don't get to decide what is broadcasting live on CNN. These are not these people are actually devalued in newsrooms. And having worked in newsrooms as a digital culture reporter for years, I've seen so many of my colleagues pushed out of the industry, targeted in layoffs, having their voices silenced, being minimized and ignored, being belittled, frankly, for even having this knowledge about all of these different things. And instead, what you see from the mainstream journalistic institutions is they don't understand influencers or podcasting or digital media. They don't understand YouTube. They don't understand Twitch. They don't understand debate bro culture. They don't understand Jubilee. They don't know what Jubilee is. They don't watch this
God,
stuff.
I wish that was me.
And I, on one hand, I understand why people don't understand this stuff because there's just so much material and you have to watch so much of it to really get it. Like the Jubilee video that is so viral with Charlie Kirk from last year, that has like literally tens of millions of views. It is such a massive influential piece of media. It's also 90 minutes long. It is movie length. And so people who are busy professionals are not necessarily going to sit down and watch a 90-minute Jubilee video. It's also not like good quality entertainment. So it may appeal to the mainstream. It may appeal to the masses. Viral content is lowest common denominator for a reason, but like people don't watch this stuff and then they just assume that Charlie Kirk was some sophisticated debate Aristotle. Like I'm just like, you've clearly never watched the man speak because words mean things and this is not what a debate is. Like this is not debate club. This is not governed by the norms of debate. This is not respectful. There's not even a third party calling, like there's no judgment process. It's literally just verbal sparring and it is designed to go viral online. And when Charlie Kirk is putting these videos on YouTube, he is doing it to mock and belittle these people. Like there is no pretense of I'm trying to reach them. I'm trying to change their minds. They're trying to change my minds. That's not what this is about at all. It is a performative form of propaganda.
Yeah.
And the most galling thing about it to me is I'm like, this is YouTube bread and butter for like Star Wars is too woke. Karens are destroying society. Like this is, I wouldn't go so far as to say it's like directly Gamergate. I just think that in the big bucket of things that people associate with Gamergate, it's more reminiscent to that than it is to what people like Ezra Klein seem to think it is. I would really love to know, Ezra, like how much of Charlie Kirk's content have you watched? Because I think he's just making up a version of someone in his head and talking about that person, and it is completely detached from reality.
Yeah, I mean, I think the point that I wanted to make was like Ezra Klein is making a big, I like your mug, by the way.
Thank you. Thank you.
It's something that I need to do myself is read more. But like Ezra, you know, he wrote a column saying we have to try to bridge this gap between left and right, which I'm all for, honestly. Like he's like, we have to live together. And I'm like, yes,
sure,
I agree.
Yeah.
And then he's going, that's why we need to like assimilate with the right. And I'm like, wait, but the right doesn't think that I should live next to them as a trans person. And, you know, my immigrant neighbor shouldn't live with them. And my friend who's a person of color down the road shouldn't live with them. I don't see a way to bridge that gap and live together. So if you're preaching, yes, we all have to dial down the temperature so that we can exist together. Yes, I agree. However, the right and Charlie Kirk did not believe that we should all live together. So this is the part that is driving me insane because there's nobody saying, well, wait a second. Like, if we are actually trying to reach these lofty goals, why aren't we defending trans lives? Why aren't we blockading ICE from taking people away from our neighborhoods? And that seems so offensive to the Ezra Klein. And it's not just him; it's his entire class of punditry. And when I say this, it's like the centrist liberal sort of alliance of professional thinkers who all say the same thing, and more often than not, they're left punching to try to score, I don't know, points. Is there a scoreboard that I don't know about? But like, they're very clearly communicating that there isn't a place for people like me, for my immigrant neighbors, for people of color in my life, and that sucks.
Yeah.
That really sucks, man. Like, and if I go out and say, well, Charlie Kirk didn't believe that I should exist, I'm going to get attacked for that, even though that was like a basic truth reiterated throughout his career. Like, it was one of the most consistent things that he said. I mean, I can't even recall all of the viral clips I saw of Kirk debating a trans person and going viral for being like, "Oh yeah, I don't think you're a woman. I think you're just a man." Is that finding common ground? No.
Right.
I don't have a question in here. I just wanted to rant.
No, you're completely right. And I think so much of what this commentary boils down to, it comes from a lot of white men. It comes from almost entirely cis people.
No, you can't say white man anymore. Like that's one demerit from the Washington Post.
That's a fireable offense. But it's like this commentary class, it's overwhelmingly people who have decided that personally they will be okay in like Donald Trump's America. Like Project 2025, if that all goes through, Ezra Klein's like, I'm gonna be okay. So I've decided to ensure that like I'm treated as favorably as possible under the new regime. All of you guys who won't be okay, I think we should throw you under the bus. Like, I'm going to hop over to the other side now while I can still get ahead. And it is extremely, like, it's such a cynical, transparent view of politics where it's just like, only my life matters. And they won't say that. They won't say that explicitly. Instead, they'll just dress it up in all of this flowery language where they're like, actually, you guys who disagreed with Charlie Kirk, you guys are the bad ones. You guys are the reason that all of this is happening. And
and in the meantime, I'm having serious discussions with my family over whether I should flee the country.
Exactly. I mean, someone on Blue Sky said this. The game always becomes distinctly clear in these moments, like who has skin in the game and who doesn't. Whose lives do we consider political and whose don't we consider political? And I just like, one thing that has heartened me in response to the Ezra Klein piece is that even among the New York Times readership, there has been so much like dismissal of the argument that he is making. You look at that comment section, it is incredibly negative toward Ezra Klein and what he is saying. And I do think that this follows the trend that we've seen, particularly over the past year, which is like these institutions like the New York Times, like the Washington Post, like the three-letter broadcast giants, they're alienating the last remaining audience that they have left. And I'm not cheering for that because I genuinely fear for what it looks like when we don't have any employed journalists anymore and no one has the resources to do even the barest bare bones of the reporting that we need. I am concerned for the death of mainstream media, but they're the ones who are like speeding it up because the Washington Post just bleeds subscribers. They bled a bunch of subscribers because they fired Karen, and the New York Times is doing the exact same thing. The only people who are going to pay to subscribe to these outlets are people who believe in democracy, who believe in liberalism. Not even necessarily liberals, but just believe in having a non-authoritarian society. And so when these outlets are just like, we're actually just going to capitulate, like, we're just letting you know we're capitulating because that's what the purpose of these columns serve. Same thing when the Washington Post runs op-eds from people in the Trump administration explaining their evil plans. Like, it's just like a big sign that's like, Trump administration advertise here. Like, we are giving up. Like, the left is not going to win. We are just surrendering to the right. When they do this stuff, I'm just like, you're sealing your own fate right now because there are a lot of people out there who are like, absolutely not. We are not surrendering to the right. We are not capitulating. And those people, like, the media ecosystem is so fragmented and broken right now. And like people, there has yet to be a realignment that can get the people who want good journalism to the good journalism. The funding structure has not yet been solidified, but we're in that period of time when like this big shift is happening. And we can only hope that the people who want good journalism have enough can actually fund that journalism. And it's about like making that happen that I think is kind of the next stage of this.
Yeah. There needs to be this understanding that we all have skin in this game, whether we think we do or not, because we could be victims of gun violence, whether we believe in Charlie Kirk's rhetoric or not. And something I've said really since Trump 1.0 is, how many people have to go septic in parking lots when they're denied abortion care for people to care. And I think that something I've figured out about the right is, they want those people to go septic in parking lots if they're going to demand care, because they don't want people to demand their fundamental rights, whether that's trans rights, whether that's rights for Black and brown people, whether that's abortion care. They want those people gone. And so I need the rest of the people in this country to remember that they also have skin in this game.
Yeah. Yes. And I think that it is really disheartening, not surprising, just disheartening to see how many, and I always say, I say normal, which is not to say that others are not normal, but I just I'm thinking more so normie culture. Yeah. Go into a Target off of a highway, talk to people inside that Target. I'm those people.
That sounds great. Take me there.
I'm the person who you talk to in that Target, it's disheartening to me that they're probably feeling more energized by Charlie Kirk right now than they feel energized by hearing stories about people who are in ICE detention centers. But also, I still have hope that a lot of these normie people, again, I don't think they really understood Charlie Kirk. I don't think that they really aligned with or agreed with all of his ideas. I think that if they were told the story of the man in ICE detention, they would also feel empathy for him. It's just so much of the problems that we're facing right now does have to do with storytelling and media and what stories people are hearing. Because the story of Charlie Kirk was a devoted husband and father, and he was basically Martin Luther King Jr., that story is being told to a lot of people right now. And we have to tell them the story of the political violence that is happening that is actually closer to them, and show them that you too have skin in the game. And that's not a new problem. That's the problem that the Democratic Party and anyone on the left has had for the past forever. But I do I'm both disheartened by seeing the way that people are sort of processing and understanding Charlie Kirk's legacy, but I'm also heartened by the knowledge that there's also a lot of people who are feeling really gaslit right now and are looking for media that's better for them to support, and who are looking for answers of how we can fix this.
All of those people should go to patreon.com/cancelmedaddy.
Exactly.
This is exactly why we're having you on, to have this conversation, to be honest. I wanted to talk specifically about the cancel culture side of this, because you have one side here, the general left, right? Almost everybody on my Blue Sky timeline was horrified by the shooting. And obviously there are people who, they want to prove that they're the edgiest of the edgy left, and we're joking about it. And nobody that I follow, but I did see it. And people who were horrified by it. In general, my impression of the left and the center is that, hey, we should take the temperature down. We are reaching a dangerous point in this country, a tipping point, if you will. I'm trans, I'm allowed to say tipping point. But on the right, it's the opposite. It's this is civil war. We have to stamp out, these people. The left has to end. You have Trump out there saying that they're going to prosecute NGOs, liberal NGOs, and you have people under him saying we should use the RICO Act to go after the Human Rights Campaign, who put out a lovely statement, by the way, that, a friend of mine who works in communications probably wrote about how we need to it down. You have, Trump made a comment the other day where he said, well, if it was up to me, we would classify the trans pride flag as a terrorist symbol. People aren't getting that message when in the aftermath of this. And I don't want to like ascribe things to Charlie Kirk, but I don't know that he would have an issue with any of that escalation on the right. And then on the other side of the right, by the way, you have all of these influencers who are scrambling for the chunks of his audience. And it's very obvious that they're doing this. You have, Candace Owens out there doing what Candace Owens does. And you have like Nick Fuentes, who is one of the most reprehensible human beings on the planet, in my opinion, trying to blame Hassan Piker for this when like Hassan was slated to debate Charlie Kirk in person. Like the two of them didn't agree, but they obviously were willing to work together because Hassan does the same type of content almost, right? Like just from a different political angle. And actually, his reaction to the shooting, you could see he like was shocked, first of all, by it and devastated.
It's scary.
Like I don't watch Hassan all the time, but when there's big news events, I kind of like to get his take and see where he's at. And so I have been tuning into his. I don't watch him. I watch his YouTube. I'm a YouTube Andy for that, and you could tell that he's like very clearly upset by this. And then on the right, you have people who are just like jumping in, trying to like devour that audience and say, hey, come over here, like Charlie Kirk's not going to have a show anymore, you should come watch my show because I'm the saddest person about Charlie Kirk. And then you have the politicians going, this means war, we're doing this, we're doing that. And nobody's like pointing out that they're saying this means war. There's not like an organized opposition to the escalation on the right because everybody else wants to dial down the temperature. How do we, in your mind, get to a point where we can both dial down the temperature and actively respond to the, quite frankly, insane ideas coming out of the right now?
Absolutely. And I think like there were so many aspects of watching this story unfold over the past week that made me feel gaslit. One of the things that made me feel like I was going insane was when people on the right started saying that Blue Sky was like glorifying the death of Charlie Kirk. I was like, this happens all the time. And like, I'm planning to write about this because there is so much just like disinformation and nonsense about Blue Sky that just, it's not real. And it's a projection of literally what is happening on X. I look at Blue Sky every single day and I look at X every single day. And I refuse to call it Twitter because Twitter is dead and Elon Musk killed it.
Wow.
We dead named Twitter on this show.
We
an unpopular stance, but my stance is like when I say Twitter, I'm talking about the old place, and when I say X, I'm talking about the thing that Elon Musk created. But so anyways, like I was watching X play out the entire day and Blue Sky, and here's what I saw. On Blue Sky, you had a ton of people who study the far right, who are leftists. You did, of course, there were people who were being crass, who were being crude. But the overarching tone and what was actually like performing well on the platform throughout the day was people saying like, this is not good. Do not celebrate this. Be careful because first of all, be careful because you're going to get caught and you're going to get punished. And second of all, this is going to cause huge issues among like extremist sects of society. And so absolutely the message on Blue Sky was like, tone it down to the point that people were saying that Blue Sky was being too boring in the wake of Charlie Kirk shooting. I literally saw people say that.
I saw that too. I was also one of the people saying, be careful what you say.
Yes.
Yeah.
So now take that and compare it to X, that Elon Musk's everything app. On X, there were posts with millions of views and hundreds of thousands of likes, outright just mocking the death of Charlie Kirk. Just outright mocking him and absolutely glorifying violence. That's Elon Musk's platform. That is his responsibility. But nonetheless, this happens all the time. The revisionist history is crafted in real time. And I do believe that Blue Sky will be threatened in the near future at a political level for this fake made up narrative that Blue Sky is an incubator of left-wing violence. When if anything, the place that is incubating violence of all kinds is Elon Musk's X. That is where all of that stuff is going down. But Blue Sky becomes the target. And I'll also say that like to your point, Katelyn, about how a lot of people on the left were actually approaching this in the exact opposite way of how the right is characterizing people on the left. When I found out about Charlie Kirk's shooting, I was in the middle of doing a podcast and
Jeez.
I got a call and I started getting texts about people saying Charlie Kirk was shot. And my co-host and I actually paused the podcast and took like 30 minutes. And when we saw the video, we were both horrified. And it's like, I was so horrified. We were both so horrified. It is disturbing. I've seen a lot of violent videos in my lifetime, and I found it to be very disturbing. And the first thing I did was literally, I Googled, like, does Charlie Kirk have kids? Because that was where my mind went, was I was like, what's his family going through right now? And I was horrified. And all of that human response to seeing that happen does not preclude or change the fact that Charlie Kirk was a hateful conservative propagandist who directly incited violence against marginalized people, and that is his legacy. Like, these two things can very easily coexist, and it is such a cowardly thing for liberal establishment media and institutions to do, to act like it's one or the other. And to act like not doing the latter or to not do the first is to somehow capitulate your humanity and to show that people on the right are like better than us. It's ridiculous. It's ridiculous. And I think like that to me has also been one of the most gaslighting aspects of this. Is I'm like, personally, my initial thoughts were about his children and his wife, who has like, there people, speaking of Candace Owens and people who knew Charlie personally, they have made so much content actually capitalizing on this. And I think that is worth pointing out, especially now that Candace Owens and some of these other people have like started saying, oh, it was Israel had something to do with like the death of my good friend Charlie Kirk. And it's just like,
I wasn't going to say exactly what she said because I was like, what are you
doing?
Anyway.
What do you do with that? What do you do with that? But it's just like the double standards around the behavior, I think, is particularly like gets under my skin and a lot of people's skin because it's just so obvious, like what is happening here.
I think a good question to ask is how can we protect ourselves, whether that's from violence, doxing, being fired, being incarcerated, and still, I'd say, still exercise our right to free speech. But it's really just providing factual statements about Charlie Kirk, about this killing, about this movement, and about political violence. Like, can we say anything at this point? And if we do, how do we protect ourselves?
Yeah. I think that it's unfortunate because one of the things that people who are marginalized constantly have to think about is like, technically, I should be allowed to do X, Y, and Z. But realistically, to protect myself, I may have to self-censor. I may have to chill my own speech to avoid being fired, to avoid, to maintain my physical safety, things of that nature. And that's why I also think it's so important for public figures in a position to do so, to tell the truth about these things. And it's another reason why, like, as a journalist, I feel like I'm always coming back to the media component of this and thinking about how, like, the mainstream media's role in all of this. But it is just like, the mainstream media has protections. Reporters and journalists have protections, and people who have resources to responsibly tell truths that are unpopular, that can result in retaliation. Those are the people who should be doing this. But instead, because the media has abdicated this responsibility, it does fall to ordinary people who do put themselves at risk to speak the truth about these things. And I feel like it really is sort of a person by person, ultimately a risk analysis of what can I lose? What is safe for me? What resources do I have? And if I could impart one sort of lesson or piece of knowledge on people outside of the media field, it's like everyday people have platforms because of social media, have these public media platforms through social media. And so people don't expect like, oh, my comment on Facebook could be used to target me and harass me, or someone could just make something up about me and use that to target and harass me. Unfortunately, yes. And there is no one size fits all way to dealing with that. But I just think it's something that people everywhere should consider, because even if you don't have social media, even if you say nothing on social media, as we have seen in the wake of this Charlie Kirk's shooting, people have been targeted falsely by these kinds of campaigns. So I do think it's something that like everyday people have to consider in these times. And I wish that there was more digital media literacy resources and training and protections for individuals, because we need them.
Kat, this has been really lovely to have you on.
Yes.
We definitely need to have you on again soon.
I would love to come back.
So for our listeners who want to keep up with your work going forward, especially you mentioned you want to write a piece about the difference between Blue Sky and X, which I think is something I'm personally looking forward to. So if they wanted to find that later, where can they go to keep up with you?
So my newsletter is at spitfirenews.com. It is free to subscribe. And then I also do paywalled stories for $5 a month. And that's the main place where you can find me. I'm also very active on Blue Sky at Kat Tenbarge. And then I'm also on Instagram at Kat Tenbarge.
Thank you so much.
Yeah, thank you guys.
Thank you so much for listening today. We know it was a serious topic, and we hope that we provided thoughtful analysis for you. If you're interested in more of this kind of analysis, please tune in to Cancel Me Daddy every other week. We are on Patreon, we are on YouTube, and you can also find us on Apple Podcasts.
If you appreciated this and want to see more, just give us a like and a subscribe. And actually, our next episode, which comes out on October 8th, is a collaboration with the War on Cars podcast. And we talk all about pro-car propaganda. So if you don't want to miss that, ring the bell and you'll be reminded when that episode is out. Cancel Me Daddy is a Flytrap media production. And today's show was made by me, Katelyn Burns, and my incredible co-host, Christine Grimaldi.
Dee Peterschmidt made our theme song, and Romy Tirico designed our graphics. Ads by Multitude Productions.
Our show is made possible by the incredible cancelers supporting our work, especially the member of our Cancel Our Hall of Fame, with the great power to cancel all of their enemies, Meg.
We appreciate your support.
Happy canceling!